and I've lived a life. I know a thing or two about some alcohol. And I can't help but think of Bacardi 151 rum, because I've had it, and I've had some pretty rough nights on it, and it's pretty potent. Hey, everybody out there. Welcome back to another episode of the Audiophiles. I'm Andy, and that's John, and we are here to listen to and discuss some music. So, John, what do you have in store for us today, sir?
Okay, so we are coming towards the end of our Jazz Funk Odyssey. That is R.E.M. the IRS years. And so the last official album with IRS is Document. And from 1987. There's some great songs on this album, some very familiar ones you would have definitely heard,
Mm-hmm.
like the one I love, and It's the End of the
Yes.
World as You Know It, and perhaps Finest Work Song. So I've gone for a slow burner, the closer of the album, Oddfellows Local 151.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know that song. I do know songs off this album, three of which you did just rattle off, and of course they're the three that I know. But I
Yeah,
was I was about four when this came out, but then as I grew up, this is how I got introduced to REM. So
yeah.
some of the bigger songs were still being played on alternative rock radio by the time I was 12, 13 years old. So yeah, this is what would open my ears to REM. But I don't know this track particular, so I like that this is right on that cusp where things get clearer for me from the REM picture. I would
Mm.
say it's kind of sad to hear that we're reaching the end of this, because if you double back, I wouldn't be upset with you, because like I'm liking sort of this era of the REM stuff that we've listened to thus
Mm.
far to varying degrees, but they're such small sample size. I mean, these are full albums, and you've given me one here and there off each of them. I'm sure there's a
Yeah.
myriad others that we can go back to at some point, which I would be very much open to. But
Mm.
in the here and now, I will go off and listen to this Oddfellows 151 and come back and let you and everybody else out there know what I think. Before we get too deep into this is an interesting start to an REM song for me, because I don't know, it's kind of like thicker in tone, like that bass got this really thick tone to it, kind of just a thicker and heavier sound to REM that I'm used to. I mean, I'm sure that they're capable of writing songs and have plenty of songs in minor keys. So this is sounds like it's minor, but it's got a darker shade to it and this heavier kind of quality thus far. We'll see where it goes, but that's just an interesting start for a band that I don't really associate that kind of sound with. And maybe that's like a prejudice of my own, or a preconception of my own that is just inaccurate. But I've always associated them with more, with kind of like brighter and a little bit more intricate sounds than these heavy, thick tones that they've got going on here. Also, it started with like this feedback generated from a guitar that was sort of carrying and resonating, while the other guitar kind of played another guitar played over top of it. And I've always seen them as a one guitar kind of band. So this is interesting if there's going to be like dual guitar tracks on this, which they're fully capable of doing. But it's just, again, something that kind of caught my ear at first, and I'm not used to when listening to REM. But yeah, this very not Mike Mills like bass line to start things off, or again, what I assumed let's take it back and give this another listen. These like clipped chords.
Oddfellows, local 151 behind the firehouse, where Pee-wee sits to prove a sage to teach. Pee-wee gathered up his proof, reached up to scratch his head, fell down and hit the ground.
Loving that guitar work. Okay, before it gets into this next part, I wanted to reflect on some of the things. So, one, I love the way the chorus doesn't have much, like it's firehouse, but the way the music kind of opens up, but not to open it to like bright sunny days, but just it opens spatially a bit, but it's still like this kind of moody, brooding kind of sound to it. Just not as chuggy as the verses are. So yeah, I'm liking this kind of like dark REM aesthetic a lot, actually. This has been to this point, one of my favorite sounds that I've heard from this, for me, earlier REM that I'm less familiar with because I was so young. Also, I don't know exactly what this song is about. Stipe is incredibly easy to discern in this track. Maybe another reason why I'm liking it, because his vocal delivery has some clarity to it while still also having that Stipe sound that I really, really enjoy a lot. Just the natural sound of his singing voice. But there's these, allusions to, outright, reference to rum just then. And I think I heard the word proof earlier, and the 151. So I think rum, I think 151, I think Bacardi, like Bacardi 151. And then it just sounds like a group of like rogues or ne'er-do-wells all meet to listen to what Pee-wee has to say as he sort of pontificates to these masses of rascals that gathered to hear him. Interesting picture that Stipe's painting here. I don't know if I'm right, but he just almost sounds like a Jesus of dystopia. People come to hear his words and his preachings and his pearls of wisdom, I think is what Stipe had said earlier. Anyway, really, really interesting stuff. Let's take it back just a little bit and then press on into what will be this. I think it sounded like the guitar is about to do something new and different. I love that. That reminded me of Sunny Day Real Estate or something.
Oddfellows, local 151 behind the firehouse, where Pee-wee sits upon the wall to preach. Boy and girl to gather pearls of wisdom falling from his mouth. Wash off the blood, wash off the 151.
Yeah. Some interesting vocalizing. Oh. Yeah, yeah, that was great. I loved that song. God, that little bit there at the end, like, when he was kind of like having fun with his vocalizations, I was having like, it's just like psycho killer David Byrne. As he would do some of that affectation on his voice. Reminded me of that. Yeah, the guitar work was really beautiful in that latter portion too. Just the droning, wailing, kind of distant fading in and out kind of sounds of that guitar just crying in the background there was really, really great. I love that. Super thick, chunky, almost like sludgy bass. Really, really cool. Good stuff. Yeah, I liked Stipe's performance in this one. His singing was great. The lyrics are really interesting. I can't help but think of like just like I said, like a group of like sort of cast outs or castaways that all kind of congregate together behind the fire station to listen to this guy kind of like absolve them of their weekly sins as they wash the rum and the blood off. All these sort of nefarious things are cleansed from them. I don't know. It's just where my head goes. I could be completely off. I have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. I've only listened to the song once, as evidenced right now. But I know where I can learn more about it and a whole lot more. And that's back with John. So let's head out.
So you're back from visiting the Oddfellows down at local 151. What do you make of it all?
It's my favorite chapter of the Oddfellows, the old local 151. No, I loved this song. This is awesome. This is probably my favorite song that
different
you've
as well.
given me from this area. I think I'd have to go back and hold them all up and against each other, but it was an odd experience for me because like for me it was an interesting start to an REM song. For one, because it has this like darker, dare I say, heavier quality to it. And I've always like that kind of like goes against my preconception of a lot of stuff I've heard from them. Now I know that they can get kind of dark and thoughtful, but dark and heavy is a little bit different and something that I wasn't expecting from them. And then you get another thing that kind of stood out to me that was kind of like, I don't want to say anti REM, but that definitely flew in the face of my what I know about REM is that you get this start of feedback on a guitar and it resonates, and what comes in is another guitar. So you've got two guitars, and I know it's just Peter Buck, right? Like that's the only guitarist in REM. I've never seen Michael Stipe play guitar before. Maybe he's picked up an acoustic here and there, but so I was like, oh, maybe this is just a track with where he features on two, like they laid two guitar tracks on this song, or they featured someone else or something. But either way, that was interesting and cool because I had never heard in such a stark fashion two guitars working together like that on an REM song. Maybe I'm there's something out there that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head, but that kind of stood out to me as well. So I'm instantly intrigued by the sounds I'm hearing, mostly because it's turning a lot of my preconceptions about the band on their head. Also, another thing that it kind of is a little bit different for me, and I happen to think that he's a wonderful bass player, but the heavy, thick bass tones in the song are not ones that I would normally attribute to Mike Mills' bass work. Usually, he'll sometimes even play with melody with bass and stuff like that, but this is so kind of primitive and thick and just bass that I was like, this doesn't sound like the way Mike Mills would play bass, but this works perfectly for the song. But it's just all a little outside of what I perceive to be the REM box in a lot of these different ways. So and for that reason, it's actually really cool to me and I'm loving this. And as the song progresses, we're treated to like this more like faint whining and feedback driven sounds via the guitar that accents each progression of the verse. So like after so long, you'd hear that kind of coming in and out of picture. I loved the way that sort of added brushstrokes of variance to this repeating portion of the verse. And I love just the overcast nature of the music. That is really, it's honestly a product of it being written in this minor key, but there are also these rhythms that assist in that as well. The chugging kind of bass during the verse, some almost clipped guitar before it goes into some strumming. All of that kind of gives it this kind of moody, cloudy atmosphere that I'm just adoring. And then there's like more of the chugging rhythmic verse opens up into what is like this distressed progression that I believe is the chorus. And it is the chorus, by the way. I believed it in real time, but then I would come to realize the song played over that every time Stipe's yelling Firehouse, we're in the chorus. But yes, he's just, which is great because it allows this because he's very storytellery in the verses. And then when he hits the chorus, he's just letting the Firehouse sort of, refrain carry the day. But the music kind of like opens up a little bit more and becomes more expansive, but without jeopardizing this kind of brooding tone to it, this dark sound to it, which again, I'm loving. And we chug back into the next verse, and Stipe waxes poetic about the heathens gathering behind some firehouse where they're being wooed by the words of and the first verse I thought was Kiwi, but is Pee-wee now that I've heard it a second time. Who at this point is being painted as some sort of street prophet for ruffians and drunks, perhaps. That's what I'm picking up on. Another chorus comes and goes, and we're treated to some really mesmerizing and circular quasi lead guitar. Like it's a lead guitar, but it's not one that is different throughout. It kind of like repeats on itself in this sort of like circular motion. And in that moment, it actually kind of reminded me of Sunny Day Real Estate and some of the guitars that we've heard on their tracks before. So I really, really liked that, even though it was quite brief. So at this point, I've noticed an allusion to rum earlier that we just talked about, and there's this constant references to 151. And I've lived a life. I know a thing or two about some alcohol. And I can't help but think of Bacardi 151 rum, because I've had it, and I've had some pretty rough nights on it, and it's pretty potent. So yeah, you get these constant references to 151. So I'm led to believe that these are all innuendos about Bacardi 151, and perhaps that there is the also proof was another word that he said earlier in the song too, which again makes me think of alcohol. So perhaps that's what it is. Maybe there's some other maybe he's using the 151 to attribute to like this local chapter of the Oddfellows, and there's like this sort of overlapping meaning to the 151. But I just thought that was kind of, it reminds me, at times this gathering reminds me of like an Elks Lodge, or I don't know if you guys have anything similar over there, but like, gentlemen's group where you all pay 50 cents a beer because you pay monthly dues, and these guys get together and just get sloshed or whatever. But there's also aspects of it that kind of remind me of church, and I'll get to that in a second. So the chorus repeats, and we get some more chugging and faint wailing while Stipe subtly vocalizes these oohs, which I thought was really interesting and nice because it wasn't like overbearing. It was actually really well mixed. It wasn't too forward in the mix, that vocalizing. And hats off to him throughout this whole song because he's so clear and his voice sounds really great. Like it sounds both good and confident. Like he knows it's good, where other times it sounded good, but he wasn't confident in how good it was. So it kind of came off like this trepidatious, like watching a baby gazelle get its feet under itself or something like that. So the guitar wailing grows a bit during this portion, and it's coming closer and also fading out at times, which I love how they do that. They kind of manipulate how forward in the song it is. And Stipe says firehouse again before devolving into some sort of impression of an angry duck almost barking its quacks. And despite that description, I enjoyed the shit out of it. It actually also kind of reminded me of like David Byrne's Psycho Killer, some of his like nah, 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 like just some of that weird sounds he would make when he's vocalizing. So it made me chuckle, and it took me back to something that I was kind of quasi familiar with, having been a Talking Heads fan. So yeah, I enjoyed that, and I loved the lyrics in the song. And even though I didn't have any like concrete explanation as to what it was about, I can't help but think of some like local crazies, rogues, and hobos gathering together to hear the wisdom of the underground town caller Pee Wee. And the wisdom he provides has them washing themselves clean of their weekly sins, like some sort of modern day Jesus of dystopia. Just back there saying whatever, and them going, oh my God, he's right. Let me clean off this rum and the blood from the fight that I got in, or the shitty needle I used, or whatever. Like it's just a really weird picture he's painting, and I like it. I like it a lot. And the music, I think, speaks for itself. I said out of the gate, I love this sort of dark and gloomy kind of sound that it has going for it. The rhythm section was really great, particularly Mills on bass. And I loved both the guitar, or should I say guitars, did in this track. This is a winner for me.
Yeah, there's a hint of perdition to the guitar in there.
Yeah.
This is a much slept on track, actually. It's the close off the album. I think it's a fantastic track, and probably doesn't get as much attention as it should. Of course, all that's going to change now. But anyway, so as we've referred to before, we've done quite a few episodes in this Jazz Funk Odyssey through the IRS years. This will be added to the playlist. A link to the playlist will be put in the description, so we don't need to go on about Athens, etc. But just to recap, the players in tonight's episode are Bill Berry, drums, backing vocals, Peter Buck, guitar. He also plays dulcimer on King of Birds in this album, and I think it's the beginnings of the dreaded mandolin starts appearing. But anyway,
Yeah. I was gonna say the
Mike
dulcimer,
Mills,
that would make sense if that's when they started to mess with that too.
yeah, Mike Mills, bass guitar, keyboards, and backing vocals, and Michael Stipe, lead vocals. So, as I said before, Document is the 5th studio album by R.E.M. released in August 1987 on Iris Records. It was the first album to be produced by Scott Litt, who would go on to produce their next 5 albums, which were pretty key in their career. When you think about it, all the way up to, was it New Adventures in Hi-Fi or whatever? But anyway, yeah. So yeah, this was a real change, but it was also continuing the progression. So from the previous album, which we listened to, Fall on Me from, Licensed Pageant, that was definite change from the sort of college jangly rock into that sort of introverted, almost country tinged Fables of Reconstruction. And then we get this sort of indie classic, Licensed Pageant. And this, again, it's more audible in terms of the lyrics. It's a harder rock sound compared to the band's previous stuff. And it was at the time their greatest success. It gave them their first ever top 10 single, The One I Love, got number 9 in the Hot 100. And the album peaked at number 10 in the Billboard 200, which again was a big breakthrough. So yeah, this really clear production, this sort of muscular quality to the riffs and everything. It was starting to signpost the band's progression towards the mainstream success, and it gave them their first platinum album as well, which is, you know, big shakes in terms of the band's progression. So the album itself, the original sleeve for the album featured the message "File Under Fire." It's a reference to what Michael Stipe believed for the whole central lyrical theme of the album, but also references the chorus to One I Love. And of course, it echoes the message of fire underwater, which was to be found on Reckoning. And then in the compilation album eponymous, it says File Under Grain, to do with one of the songs being about hunger and the image of grain on the front of the cover. There were 2 rejected titles for this album, which was R.E.M. number 5 and Table of Content, and both of those appear on the back cover as part of it.
Any explanation as to why they were rejected?
Because they're shit. Other possible album titles that they came up with were Mr. Evil Breakfast, Skin Up with R.E.M. I like that one, and Last Train to Disneyland, which was suggested by Peter Buck, who thought that America under Reagan was beginning to feel a lot like a theme park.
Yeah.
So the album itself is a really, really good album. I'll just go through the tracks with a one-word sort of summation. Yeah, the pithy sort of guy I am. Finest Work song, the opener, absolute banger. I would call it authoritative, and it sets the tone from the start. Welcome to the Occupation, prosaic, not my favorite track at all. Exhuming McCartney is rambunctious. Disturbance at the Heron House is edifying. Strange is an ill-advised wire cover. I won't say any more. It's the End of the World as We Know It, and I Feel Fine is ubiquitous. One I Love, it's stirring. Fireplace, I would say saxophone. Anyone who's heard it will know exactly what I'm talking about. Lightning Hopkins is kinetic. King of Birds, inspirational. Live is one of the songs I remember them doing, which just every hair on the back of my tongue stood up. It was unbelievable. And this one, which I would say is almost predatory, the way the guitar moves through the song. I've got really good reviews, as you can imagine, but some really, for a change, some insightful reviews as well. Los Angeles Times observed a tougher, meaner, leaner album than its predecessors. All of them can't help but talk about Licensed Pageant. So it shows how impactful that was. With a far more hard-edged guitar sound and tenser rock rhythms, and the opaque mystery that was so enticingly R.E.M. has been largely replaced with something more definite and immediately tangible. Those side trips, psychedelic, political, and otherwise, are plentiful. So they're right. It's the clearing of the mists almost in terms of the band's identity.
The dust settling.
Yeah. which Famous Reconstruction is the mistiest album and probably my favorite. But there you go. AllMusic said that where Licensed Pageant sounded a bit like a party record, our document is a fiery statement, and its memorable melodies and riffs are made all the more indelible by its righteous anger. And Uncut wrote, if 1986 Licensed Pageant, see, they can't help but mention it every time, had marked the beginnings of R.E.M's emergence from their cocoon of indie diffidence, 1987's document was where they first properly reconciled themselves to their destiny as the only group, the 1980s American college rock milieu, to graduate to stadiums and stay there. I think they're probably right saying that as well, actually.
Yeah.
So I'll get on to the lyrics and then a little bit more about the song. Oddfellows Local 151 behind the firehouse, where Pee-wee sits to prove a sage to teach. Pee-wee gathered up his proof, reached up to scratch his head, fell down and hit the ground again. Firehouse, firehouse. Why do the heathens rage behind the firehouse, where Pee-wee sits upon the wall to preach? This boy and girl that gathered wisdom, pearls of wisdom, falling from his mouth. Wash off the blood, wash off the rum. Firehouse, firehouse. And then, as you say, there's kind of solo. This guitar, anyway. Oddfellows Local 151 behind the firehouse, where Pee-wee sits upon the wall to preach. This boy and girl that gather pearls of wisdom, falling from his mouth. Wash off the blood, wash off the 151. Firehouse, 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 firehouse. Ooh, yeah. Firehouse. There you go. That's the lyrics. There's a really good website called Diffuser, and what they've done is they've sort of taken bits from other places and put it together as an article on this song. Interviews from other magazines. It's really interesting. So I'll just read you a bit about it. It says the setting is a local lodge for the Oddfellows social organization. Just like the Mooses or the Shriners, Peter Buck said in Reveal, the story of R.E.M. Michael Stipe fashioned a searing indictment of those who don't keep America's social contract by focusing on the plight of the poor left to their own devices, just outside that fraternal embrace, so near to the comforts of community, but yet so far away. Stipe got a personal glimpse of those whose economic engine of the 80s left behind when he'd regularly walk past this neighbouring lodge. It was round the corner from where he used to live. One of them, actually called Pee-wee, took to preaching to his fellow drunkards, as well as the occasional passerby. Devoid of hope, they turned to whatever anesthesia they could find, probably Bacardi 151. Stipe says, when a neighbourhood starts having people pass out on the ground, it means that society in that neighbourhood is already on the downswing. Not because these people are bad, but because it represents the fact that people aren't taking care of their duties to take care of them. Peter Buck said in Q magazine in 1992, that song is actually about all those winos who used to live down the street from us. They used to live in cars. We call them the motor club. These old guys who sleep in the cars and drink all the time. Every once in a while, you give them $5 to drop off a bottle. The pearls of wisdom that fall from his mouth are his teeth, because it's that in bad shape. And obviously, wash off the blood, wash off the 151 is reference to, as you said, Bacardi 151. Stipe himself said the song was a debunking of the Southern folk myths that he had written for Fables of the Reconstruction, songs like Wendell G and Old Man Kenzie. In other words, these quaint eccentrics of his earlier songs have now turned out to be nothing more than sad old drunks. Really interesting point they made here. Even this early into their ride into superstardom, R.E.M was already coming face to face with some larger, more uncomfortable truths. The bigger they got, the more diverse their fan base grew. They were no longer a college rock niche act, but emerging fame brought its own challenges. I had to grapple with a lot of contradictions back in the 80s, Stipe told The Guardian years later. I would look out on the stage at the Reagan youth. That was when R.E.M went beyond the freaks, the fags, the fat girls, the art students, and the indie music fanatics. Suddenly, you had an audience that included people who would sooner kick me on the street than let me walk by unperturbed. I'm exaggerating to make a point, but it's certainly an audience that, in the main, did not share my political leanings or affiliations and did not like how flamboyant I was as a performer or indeed a sexual creature. And I had to look out on that and think, well, what do I do with this?
Mm.
So Interesting time change. This was the emergence of them, as you say, from the cocoon into their fully grown, world-dominating band. And this album concluded the band's time with IRS. They signed to Warner Brothers and continued their upward trajectory through Green, which was probably their last sort of indie feeling album, and then onwards, Out of Time, Automatic for People, Monster, etc., etc. And each band saw their fan base swell and commercial success swell. So that would be the end of our Jazz Funk Odyssey. However, because I've already cheated once by including the compilation album, there is going to be one last stop in the Jazz Funk Odyssey. So a month before their Warner Brothers debut, Green, was released, IRS brought out a compilation album called Eponymous. And that shall be our final stop on the tour of the IRS years.
I look forward to it. This has been a quite a ride.
It has. It has been fun for me as well. Okay, I will wrap things up and say thanks for listening to Sandy. Folks out there, get on board the Jazz Funk Odyssey train. Doot, doot. If you like this song, hit the like button. Drop some comments. We'd love to hear from you about this particular track and about the album document as well, and your thoughts on R.E.M in general. We love reading all your stuff. If you haven't subscribed already, please do, and help support this channel. And finally, we get enough viewers, we can buy out their back catalogue. That being said, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see all of you on the next episode of the Audiophiles.
See you later, guys.